the first overall pick with the Bears. I'll start off with the Giants with the second pick, and we'll go back and forth just to make it a little bit more interesting. And with that being said, we're going to start off right here with the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, and it's going to be an easy one for me. It's nice to get the first overall pick. If the Bears are selecting in the number one spot and Caleb Williams is willing to go there, you never really know with him. I think you have to take Caleb Williams in the spot. I wouldn't necessarily say he's this generational prospect like a lot of people said with Trevor Lawrence. For example, I think Lawrence is a better prospect than a guy like Williams is. But if the Bears continue this poor season, I am the Justin Fields supporter on the channel, but he's clearly not the answer there. You got to refresh, you got to get new guys in, and that starts at the quarterback position. I think Caleb Williams would be a great option, so he's the guy that I'd have to go with at number one.
Yeah, and back-to-back quarterbacks we'll see here. The Giants are going to go with Drake May. Pretty self-explanatory. Daniel Jones is pretty much done with this team, as you guys will see. I'll have my opinion on that later this weekend on Sunday, talking about why Daniel Jones just shouldn't go back to the Giants. They have an out after next season, so I still think even if he somewhat plays during maybe the beginning of the year, maybe he's playing good, you can do something else later maybe, and it's not like you're going to lose out if Daniel Jones comes back next year, and if he plays all right, then you can still trade him or you still have Drake May, but I still think that Drake May is, you could make an argument as the best quarterback in this class. There are some people making that argument now. I still think Caleb Williams is a little bit better, but Drake May would probably fit into this Giant system pretty well. And with a guy like Brian Daboll, who succeeded with a guy like Josh Allen, Drake May isn't exactly Josh Allen. I would say he's closer to a guy like Justin Herbert, but still a very similar build.
Yeah, absolutely. And the two QBs are off the board. If you guys don't know, Banning's the Giants fan. I'm the Patriots fan, and the Patriots are up at three. I think this will probably be the best case scenario for the Patriots front office because it doesn't seem like they really want to decide what they want to do at quarterback. Obviously, Mac Jones had a horrible year. Bailey Zappi has not been much better, and they can't even decide who the starter is going into next week. So there's a lot of problems there, but their biggest problem on the offense relies on that wide receiver room, and they don't have any names there. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a lot of people's number one prospect in this class. Wouldn't blame anyone for having him or Bowers in that top spot. And in a Patriots locker room that needs talent, if we're being honest, at any facet of football, they don't have a lot of talented guys. Getting a guy that has so much raw talent and has shown why he's going to be an effective NFL receiver at the college level for years now, I think is perfect. They take Marvin Harrison Jr., and I think Patriots fans would be very happy about this pick.
Yeah, next up with the Cardinals here, losing out on their guy Marvin Harrison. Also, they still believe in Kyler Murray. So I think you go out and get a guy to protect for him. On one side, they have Paris Johnson, who obviously you drafted last year. You still expect him to do some good things. But DJ Humphries has been hurt. He hasn't really been that fantastic. I think he's pretty replaceable. And Olu Fashanu is the best tackle in this class, in my opinion. I think once we get closer to the draft and we see kind of how he measures next to a guy like Joe Alt a little bit bigger, so that could be more enticing. But for now, I think with what we've seen, Olu Fashanu is the best tackle.
Yeah, fair enough there. I think the Cardinals have a lot of issues, and getting a stud left or right tackle is going to help them. But for the Bears at five, obviously I gave him Caleb Williams at one. So we're going to want to go over to the opposite side of the football. The Bears defense has a lot of issues all across it, don't get me wrong. But I think the biggest thing they need is a pass rusher. Yannick Ngakoue came this year, and he's just not the long-term answer. I know they got out and traded for a guy like Montez Sweat. That's going to be great, but you need more on that defensive line. And I know this guy has fallen down some people's draft boards in the recent weeks, but I still really like Jared Verse. I think he's going to be one of the most versatile, nice edge rushers in the whole class. I think he provides offense, or sorry, not offense, but he provides defense when it comes to the pass and the run. So I think he has a lot of great tools in his bag, and I think he's a guy that could be developed into a Montez Sweat sort of role. And if you have two Montez Sweats on your line, it's going to go pretty well. So I'm still high on Jared Verse. I would take him at five.
Yeah, and I think with the Green Bay Packers here, there is a lot of enticing options. They're not going to draft wide receiver. We know that. It just seems like a guarantee in the draft every single year. Whether they have very good options on the board or not, they're still not going to take a guy. I still think that you need something to help out your offensive quarterback who is going into his second season as a starter next year, and it seems like they're going to keep him. He's had some ups and downs, but I do think that if you get a weapon here like Brock Bowers at the 6th pick, I know they do need some help on the line, but I'm more of a believer, especially in a instance like this where you could get, in my opinion, the best player in the draft, the most versatile weapon. Brock Bowers, the best tight end prospect that we've seen in a very long time. You could argue almost ever. I think he's a better prospect than we saw with Kyle Pitts. And I think that a team like Green Bay should prioritize maybe getting tackles in free agency and then getting a guy like Brock Bowers who could go in and be a dominant threat for their team, and with a guy like Jordan Love that could help them out a lot. And there's still a lot of good tackles left in this draft. So you can go out and get a guy in the 2nd round. I don't think you can let Brock Bowers slip past the 6th spot. Like I said before, he's my number 1 guy in this whole entire draft.
Yeah, I think the Packers would love to have a guy like him, and the Rams are on the clock. The Rams realistically could be picking a little bit earlier than this when the draft rolls around, or maybe later. It's a weird NFC West, but in the 7th spot, I'm going to give them a guy that I know has also been falling down people's boards, but he's probably still my corner 1 in this class, and that's Kool-Aid McKinstry. Kool-Aid has had a rougher couple weeks than you expect for a guy that's been dominating in his college career at Alabama, but the Rams really need help in the secondary, like really, really need help. They almost don't have a single name out there that I think is worthy of being an NFL starter. And that is crazy to say, but this defense is very, very poor. You obviously have Aaron Donald up front. So while he's still around and still playing at a high level, you got to address that secondary. I think Kool-Aid McKinstry comes in and makes an immediate impact, and the Rams finally address that defense, which they've been lacking on in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and going on the opposite side of the ball here, the Titans with the 8th overall pick, they do have a lot of different options to go with here, but I do think if you're going to buy in with Will Levis with their 2nd round pick last year, it seems like they're going to go with that. I think you have to go with a wide receiver here. Their number 1 need on here, I think that makes sense too. And I'm going to go with my wide receiver 2 in this class. Rome Odunze has been fantastic this year for Washington. Obviously, it helps that he has one of the best quarterbacks in college football, and the way that he's going to profile out just a massive guy that is going to have very fast speed. I do think as of right now, he is my wide receiver 2. I know you could throw in a guy like Malik Neighbors up there, even anyone else really in this same area, Keon Coleman. You could make an argument for a lot of these guys, but I do think Rome would fit into that offense pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. And at 9 is the Falcons. Obviously, some people are going to mock quarterback here. I know a lot of people would. I'm going to stay away from that. I know I've talked about how I don't think Desmond Ridder is the answer. I don't think he's a great NFL prospect. I still feel very similar about that. But the Falcons are in a spot where they've drafted offense in the 1st round. It feels like year after year after year. Obviously, with guys like Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson that they were able to take early, that's great. But their defense is lacking. We're starting to see it. And with a guy like Calais Campbell, who is kind of been bouncing around from team to team and producing well towards the end of his career, I see him on the way out pretty soon. I don't think he's the long-term answer, absolutely, but there is a guy that can come in and be a stud on that defensive line. And although he doesn't play the exact same role as a guy like Calais Campbell, I think he has the potential to be almost just as good, and that's very high praise. But I'm going to put your guy, Johnny Newton, the defensive lineman out of Illinois here. I think he is he checks a lot of boxes. I think that he's shown his ability to blow up plays and get big TFLs, but I also think he's solid enough to just do his part and, maybe provide some edge rushing for the big guy. But we've really seen what he does in the run game, and I think the Falcons could use more of that on the defensive side.
Yeah, and I think Washington here at 10, they like what's gone on with this board. They have a lot of different options to go with. You could go maybe edge, maybe tackle. I am going to go with tackle here. They do believe in Sam Howell as their guy for the next few years, and I think that could work out. He was a guy that was very high praised, could have been a top 5 pick almost at one point in the draft. Didn't have the greatest end of a career at UNC, maybe stayed a little too long. Depending on who you ask, there are a lot of factors that maybe made him drop down in the draft. I still think he's a good prospect. I still think that they could figure out a way to get him some protection, and I think they do here with Joe Alt at the 10th pick. I think this is a fantastic pick for them, and there's a lot of different options to go with for a team like Washington, but I think you got to take the best player on the board.
Yeah, and the Buccaneers are up at 11. I think they're mad about that pick. Obviously, Joe Alt was slipping a little bit on our board, and he's a pretty great offensive tackle prospect. But I think the Buccaneers still go with the offensive line. They do have some great exterior offensive linemen, of course, Tristan Wirfs, but I think they're going to take a guy that has more mobility and could possibly move to guard, and that would be Tulis Fuaga out of Oregon State. He's listed as a tackle. Some places will have him listed as interior offensive line. I think he has the versatility to play both, obviously, depending on what the Buccaneers need on any given day. He's someone that, I'm still learning about. He's been rising up people's draft boards, but when you have someone that is so flexible, when guys like Olu and Joe Alt are probably better offensive tackle prospects, I wouldn't say that's a stretch, but maybe don't have the versatility to play guard as smoothly. A guy like Olu maybe, but definitely not Joe Alt. I think Tulis Fuaga is definitely going to be an intriguing prospect. And as we go down the upcoming weeks, maybe he rises up people's boards even more. I don't think he's that top tier level offensive tackle prospect, but I think his versatility makes him a worthwhile take at 11 for the Bucs.
Yeah, and at 12 here for the Jets, it does say that quarterback's their number one need, but it seems like Aaron Rodgers is going to come back. So I'm going to pair him up with Malik Nabers here, who has been fantastic for this LSU team all year. I think it's very close between him, a guy like Keon Coleman. I do think that Keon Coleman may be a little bit better, but I do think that Malik Nabers would fit into this Jets team just a little bit better, based on the way that Robert Saleh is kind of scheming up this offense so far. And I think a guy like that would be fantastic for Rodgers, a deep ball threat coming back next year. And you kind of bank on him coming back, even if maybe he doesn't pan out so well this year after that injury. I still think you could go with a quarterback later in this draft. I mean, we all know this is one of the deepest quarterback drafts in a long time. So I don't think you're too worried about that now. I think you got to go with the offense and get him a weapon.
Yeah, absolutely. And at 13, it's the Broncos. Obviously, at the start of the year, this would have been a surefire defensive pick, allowing 70 points on them against Miami. But the defense has stepped up and looked a lot better. And you could say that about this whole Broncos team. One thing I'll point to is I know QB is listed as a need, but Russell Wilson has proven that he is not a bad quarterback in the NFL. He's not at his elite level, but week after week, he's been putting up good numbers and he looks the part out there. So I don't think now is the time to chase a quarterback. I actually think with Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton having their issues there, it's time to get another receiver, one that you can develop. It could have been Malik Nabers, but you mentioned Keon Coleman. I'm going to roll with him here. I imagine him being able to build up a connection with Russ. And on defense, they've shown that they can get free agents. They've shown that they're willing to trade for guys on the defensive side. Hopefully they figure out that out there. But when it comes to the wide receiver prospects, you don't find these studs that you can develop in free agency very often. You usually have to go to the draft. I think that's what they do with Keon Coleman.
Yeah, and with the Chargers here with a 14th overall pick, they do have a lot of different options. You could go offense, you could go defense. I do think they will go defense here. They need some help on that D line, and I think they're going to go with the best player on the board available at this point. Dallas Turner, they need some help within the linebacker area too. He can go and play on the line or linebacker like we've seen at Alabama. So I think he fits in pretty well. I know that there's a little bit of talk between whether he or Jared Verse is better. I think we have to see what happens for the rest of the season. I think it's only because Jared Verse hasn't played as well as Dallas Turner this season. But with a position like edge and kind of that overall linebacker area, it's a thing where we may see a lot of production in college, but you may just not be in the right scheme to go out there and get exactly what you want stats wise and stuff towards the season. So I think once we see them get measured out a little bit, and maybe we'll see a solidified guy number one in that area. But this edge class is very deep. So for right now, I think that Dallas Turner goes to Los Angeles here, but he could easily rise up and be that edge number one.
Yeah, and I think the Colts are in a very difficult spot at 15, just with how the board is shaped up. They are really in need of a great wide receiver. I know people like Michael Pittman. I still think they need more there. And Josh Downs is developing, so maybe I don't go that route anyways. But one thing the Colts have proven that they've been able to do year after year is develop these hybrid linebackers that have pass rush capabilities, but can also cover a little bit. And when I look at a guy like Laiatu Latu from UCLA, I think he could be one of them. I know it's not necessarily a pressing need, and Colts fans might not love the pick, but I have no doubt in an Indianapolis system, we'll see the best of Latu. So maybe a little bit of a luxury pick. Maybe he steps in and doesn't make an immediate impact, year one. But I think this is the perfect system for him. And with him still on the board, I don't think Indianapolis would pass on him based on what we've seen shake up so far.
Yeah, and I mean, we just talked about edge there too. Latu could easily be a top 10 pick, but as we all know, with his medical history, having to retire from football, that makes him drop down a little bit. He's a little bit older. So all of that coming into play, he's still a top 15 pick right now for us. But if he didn't have to deal with those battles, he would probably be closer to a top 5 pick. But you can't really look past having to medically retire from football. Now, the Raiders at the 16th pick, they're in a very interesting spot because a lot of people think that they need to go with quarterback in this spot. And I think they could be right. I mean, there's a lot of different options on the board here at quarterback. You have guys like Bo Nix, Michael Penix, JJ McCarthy, and even if you want to go down to Jaden Daniels, Quinn Ewers, Riley Leonard. And I know that there's talk about Shedeur Sanders staying at college, but as of right now, he's eligible for the draft. And if we're making these mock drafts based on what we know right now, Shedeur Sanders is my third quarterback in this class. I think the Raiders invest in him here. They didn't put too much in Aiden O'Connell. I don't think he's really going to be a starter. He could be a very good backup, but I think Jimmy Garoppolo should not be the quarterback there anymore. I think if Shedeur Sanders enters the draft, this would be a good pick here. I know some people are a little in between on him. He has been fantastic. He has a very bad offensive line right now and is still somehow putting up some of the best numbers in college football. So I think with this team, you maybe entice Davante Adams to stay. Josh Jacobs, you got there too. So it would be a very good offense to go into as well. Michael Mayer, there's a lot of good guys over there. I think they're just a quarterback away from really being able to compete, and they get their quarterback here with Shedeur.
Yeah. And at 17 is the Buffalo Bills. Obviously disappointing through the first half of the season, only hanging around 500 right now. And when I look at this team, they are still pretty solid on paper, but we haven't seen a lot of production from their secondary. Obviously, a guy like Damar Hamlin wasn't the answer. And when you look at their other safeties in that core, you have some great guys with Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, but they're aging out. I mean, they're on the older side. And we see in secondaries when guys kind of lose that speed, lose that second gear, it's all but over. And with the cornerback class that we have this year, which is very deep, I think there's a lot of things they could do. And I'm not going to give them a true safety here. I'm going to give them a guy who unfortunately just struggled with a major injury. So I'm projecting that he'll be healthy by the time the draft comes around. Hopefully Cooper DeJean recovers. And if he does, I think he would be the perfect fit for the Bills here because he can play corner. He can start at corner in the NFL, but he has safety hybrid capability. So if a guy like Hyde or Poyer either gets injured or regresses, I think he could step in right there. I think that would be a huge luxury for this Bills defense to have, which they honestly don't have right now. So hopefully he gets healthy. Hopefully this pick would work out for the Bills. And if it does, I think he would find himself a big role in Buffalo right away.
Yeah, and this Bengals team right here at 18, they do need a little bit of help in a bunch of different areas. I do think that tackle is obviously one of their needs here. J.C. Latham is available on this board right now. He's my 17th best player in the draft. The Bengals have the 18th pick, and he's still there. So I think that fits in perfectly for this team. Get a little bit of help from Joe Burrow. I know they've been trying to build it up in free agency, but you can't really go wrong here with a guy like J.C. Latham.
Yeah, and that's tough right there because I think the Saints would have liked to get a guy like him. Obviously, they have some dudes on their offensive line that are pretty solid, but offensive line, you can never use enough of them. That's what we've seen in the NFL in recent years. So I think they address the opposite side of the ball. And I know this is a bit of a reach right now. I don't think a lot of people would have this guy here, but we saw what the Lions did last year, taking Jack Campbell towards the middle, late first round when we didn't see a lot of true middle linebackers really projected in that range. And I think that's exactly what the Saints could do with Barrett Carter out of Clemson. And I know a lot of people like Jeremiah Trotter Jr., who is his teammate, but when I look at a guy like Barrett Carter going into a room that would be headlined by Demario Davis, still one of the best linebackers in all of football, I think those two would mesh well together, considering I think Barrett Carter is a little bit better as a pass defender, as a middle linebacker, and Demario Davis obviously is a great run defender. I think that would be a great combo that you get there. I know they run a 4-3, so Barrett Carter would do a lot of sub linebacking, which I think could be good for him in his development. I think the Saints have a lot of needs. I think middle linebacker might not be their most pressing one with Demario Davis being so good. But when we talk about development, we talk about a guy that will lead Barrett Carter to a successful career. I wouldn't pick anyone over Demario Davis, to be honest. So I think it would be a great pick. And hopefully Saints fans aren't too mad about that, but your defense needs help anyways. It would definitely be an assist.
Yeah, a little bit of a surprise there with Barrett Carter. Next up here with the Cardinals, you went with Olu Fashanu earlier. I think that they got to go with defense here because they just got their offensive player. And I think they're going to get another Penn State teammate here with Chop Robinson. They need some help on that D line. Chop Robinson can go in there and play on the edge. He can help them out a lot. So they're going to get two Nittany Lions in this draft.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we're at 21 and it's the Vikings. I think there's a lot of directions they could go. Their defense has stepped up from the horrible start that they had, but I still think you need to address that cornerback room. There's not a lot of guys that I trust to start for me day in and day out. And with guys like Nate Wiggins still being on the board, my guy Josh Newton is still there, but I think based on the schemes and what the fit looks like there, I would like to go Nate Wiggins here. I think he's a good cover corner. He's obviously getting a lot of hype, and I'm going back-to-back Clemson players in my two alternating picks here. But I think the Vikings need playmakers. I think Nate Wiggins can be that guy. Oh, man.
And next up here, with the Cowboys, they're in a position where they do need a lot of different guys here. They have a need at pretty much a good amount of the positions, even though this team is built very well. I think this is one of those teams that could still go out there and get maybe a possible you could look at the offensive line, you could look at the defensive line. There's a lot of good guys left available at this point. I think they do need help on that defensive line. I'm going to go with Leonard Taylor here. He's been a guy that's been rising up some draft boards, and I think he would be a pretty good fit in Dallas.
Yeah, and with the Steelers at 23, I'm going to push my propaganda here again. I don't really think that George Pickens is the number one option at receiver. I don't think he's a number one receiver in the NFL. And Deontay Johnson is great and all, but he's shown that he's not always healthy and he's not even always consistent. This Steelers team, I know some people are going to say quarterback. People are already off the Kenny Pickett train. I don't really care who you have at quarterback. The defense is great. You need playmakers on the offense. And when I look at a guy like Emeka Egbuka, who has shown flashes of being one of the best receivers in college football, I know he's not always at that level, but I think if he's developed, he can really hit that ceiling. I think the Steelers would love to bring in a guy like him. And if you can keep George Pickens at a high level, if you can develop him that way, and Deontay Johnson can stay on the field, you just built yourself a really electric wide receiver core, which we haven't really seen from Pittsburgh since, 2015, 2016. I think it's a worthwhile pick here.
Yeah, and this Texans team has definitely played a lot better than we expected. Talking about that pretty much every week now. They have their quarterback of the future, and they do need some help within the wide receiver department. I don't really know if I feel like they should draft a wide receiver at this spot. I think that they're a little far off with the 24th pick. I think with Emeka Egbuka kind of going off, that may be a little bit of the edge of maybe drafting a wide receiver. I don't really see any other guys going this high that should at this point. Maybe we'll see a guy develop into something like that. But I do think that they go on the opposite side of the ball, and they do need some help on that defensive line, which it seems like we're saying that with every single team up to this point. But I think Braylon Trice from Washington could come in here and fit pretty well. They need some help in that D-line and linebacker area. I know Trice plays a little bit more on the edge, but I still think with a team like this, you can figure out a way to get him on the field. And it may not be their immediate need, but he is one of the best players left on the board at this point. I think you got to go with him.
Absolutely. And the Dolphins are up at 25. They were a team that I really thought could use a guy like Leonard Taylor, who the Cowboys picked up at 22 in our mock. But if you're going to go in the trenches, you have to go on one side or the other. If the defensive line is off, I do think they go offensive line. And when I see a guy like Amarius Mims still on the board, we know the Dolphins like their linemen to be absolute monsters. They don't really care about the technicality of the guys. They want someone that is huge and imposing. We see with Teron Armstead. Don't get me wrong, he's one of the best blockers in the entire league, but he's mostly in his wheelhouse when he's just overpowering dudes. I could see Marius Mims doing the same thing on the opposite side. They haven't really found elite offensive linemen outside of Armstead. Obviously, they had to trade for him. So if they can develop one, get a homegrown talent, I think that would definitely elevate Tua's pocket presence, which he'd already shown is quite great this year. And anything that makes this offense better is going to make Mike McDaniel happy. If it's on the line, I think it's Marius Mims.
Yeah, and this Seattle team, an interesting team because they do need some help on the interior of the offensive line. I don't really think there's any guy as of right now that you could really draft in the first round that you would feel comfortable with. I think they're more towards the second round. So they do need some help in some other different areas. I do think that this team, it says that they need some help on the edge, and I think J2 Tuimoloau would be great here. He's a guy that could easily get into the first round. He was very high up on a lot of people's boards going into this season, and he's had some good games. He had a very good game last year, which is why people were looking at him as one of the best players in the country. He's dropped down a little bit, but still one of the best edge rushers in this draft, which is very deep.
Yeah, and I think the Jaguars at 27 are very mad about that pick because I think it would have been a great fit in Jacksonville. He has that pass rushing ceiling that I think is hard to match, even with some of these top end guys. But they also could address a different part of their defense with the secondary. Obviously, a guy that we're both fans of, and Nittany Lion, is still on the board. It would be the third Penn State player off the board, and I think it would be Kalen King here at 27. The Jaguars just need more players there. Obviously, they've had secondary guys not work out in the last couple of years. You look at a guy like CJ Henderson, a couple of these other guys that they've brought through the organization. Hopefully, Kalen King shows that he's one of the most consistent players in the NFL because that's what he's been doing at college. I think he's almost always locked down. Of course, in college, corners are meant to be burnt at certain times, but Kalen King usually keeps the ball in front of him. I think he has great cover skills, and on the Jags defense that runs a lot of hybrid zone and man, I trust a guy like Kalen King to adapt to the system. And just when it comes to the overall talent left on the board, I think he's one of the most talented guys that was left at this spot.
Yeah, and San Francisco going to go in that same area. They see Kalen King come off the board, and I do think that they kind of should go with a defensive back in this area. There are a bunch of different options you could go with, potentially a safety, but I do think that they're going to go with more of a cornerback. I would say more of a defensive back overall. Kamari Lassiter from Georgia has been good this year. He's a bigger guy. He may not be the fastest guy, but he can go out there, especially with this San Francisco team that is built. They're going to go up against a lot of big receivers. It just seems like every year with these marquee matchups that they going up against Dallas, you're going to have to go up against a big guy overall on that team. All those receivers, pretty big. CeeDee Lamb, one of the main guys over there. A lot of the teams that they're going to face too, like Seattle, have big receivers, DK Metcalf. So Kamari Lassiter can play a little bit more of a defensive back role, and he's a bigger guy that can go out there and play deeper down the field, help out in that safety cornerback area, and he can help this team.
Yeah, and I think the Ravens are very mad about that pick. I think that's a direction that they would have gone as well. I know their needs are always going to say wide receiver because Ravens fans always say that Lamar Jackson needs more weapons. Yeah, I think he finally has that. I think they need more wide receivers they get in free agency because Zay Flowers is one of the best rookies in the entire NFL. I think you go defensive side of the ball. Obviously, they play some hard-nosed football, and I've been talking about this dude all year. I don't really know how much I've said it on the channel, but I'm a huge fan of Josh Newton. He was pretty low down people's boards. I still think he's a first-round talent, obviously late or an early second-round guy. I think the Ravens are willing to reach on him here. He's another guy that's a little bit taller. I know he's older. I know he maybe doesn't have the foot speed of some of these elite guys, but he plays insane coverage. He doesn't let balls go past him, and he is a jump ball menace because he just has the height and length on him. I really like Josh Newton here at 29. If he can work with a guy like Marlon Humphrey, who I think would be his absolute ceiling comparison, I think the Ravens would be very happy to have two of those guys. It's a bit of a projection, but I think when we get to the time where it's really NFL draft talk time, I think Josh Newton will be hanging around people's first rounds for sure.
Yeah, and we see the Lions here. I think they're also going to go with a defensive back. I think they feel pretty happy seeing these three cornerbacks go off the board, just because personally, I think Cameron Kitchens, who is a little bit more of a safety, so he may drop down position-wise, but I do think that they could definitely use him on this Lions team. They do have some good safeties, taking Brian Branch last year, but I think Kitchens can go in and play a big role on this team. One of the best defensive backs overall in college football right now, and I think they'd feel very happy getting a guy like him with a 30 overall pick.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the Chiefs, I'm just going to be honest, that wide receiver room is horrible. And there's a lot of options they could go with right here. I'm going to go a little bit outside of the norm. I know A.T. Mitchell, Leggetti out of South Carolina, Xavier Worthy is a guy I've personally talked up quite a bit. I'm not going to go with any of them. I'm going to go with Johnny Wilson here. I mean, you really just can't teach size. If you ask me right now, do I think he's the best out of those four? Probably not. But when you look at measurables, he absolutely dominates in those fields. It's obviously going to depend what he runs. You don't expect him to be the fastest guy on the planet, but on a Chiefs team that needs overpowering weapons, we've seen the success they've had with Travis Kelce at tight end, and he really dominates because of his size, not to mention his elite route running, all the great stuff that makes him Travis Kelce. My point is, I think Mahomes connects better with these guys. Obviously, Tyreek Hill is quite the opposite. That was Mahomes, one of his best targets ever. But in the modern era, Mahomes doesn't have a whole lot of time to do much in this offense. It feels like he needs big targets and guys that create separation. I really like Johnny Wilson. We'll see how his season progresses. I know he has his flaws, but if we're talking about a projection towards the end of the season, I think he's going to be someone that you just can't pass up on in late first, early second round range.
Yeah, and the Eagles here, kind of in that same area that we talk about every year as the Chiefs, a little bit of a prize pick here. You can really go with pretty much any area just because the team's so good overall. I do think they also go with the receiver, and there's a lot of different options here. I think that with the way this team is set up, you have A.J. Brown, you have DeVonta Smith. You usually put DeVonta Smith more in the slot. So you have A.J. Brown as that wide receiver 1. You maybe want a bigger wide receiver 2 just so you can keep DeVonta Smith in the slot. I think A.D. Mitchell would fit in perfectly here, just based on what I'm saying there. I mean, he's a guy that can go out there, a very big guy, and he can go out there and get all those jump balls like we've seen in his time with Georgia and now with Texas. So this guy should fit very well with this team and with one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL overall with Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that being said, that is the official first round mock from us. I don't think everything went the way we exactly wanted it to. Definitely had some picks stolen from me personally, but I mean, looking at the guys still left on the board, is there anyone that we didn't mention that you think could be in the first round talks pretty soon?
Yeah, I think there is definitely some guys. Obviously, you look at guys like Bo Nix, Michael Penix, both of those guys could easily get in there. A lot of guys, too, that I would have on my board here still. JJ McCarthy's kind of on the edge. Graham Barton from Duke. He's a guy that I really like on the offensive tackle side. He can fit in there pretty much any position on the offensive line he's played. Other guys, too, like Denzel Burke, he's fallen down a little bit just because his production hasn't been that high this year overall. And I do think there's going to be some other guys that could move up there. I think if we don't see Shedeur Sanders in the draft, I think that definitely changes a lot of things. I do think that with us only mocking 3 quarterbacks and Caleb Williams and Drake May going in the top 2 picks, I don't think that's going to happen. I think both of those guys will get drafted, but I'm saying I think there's going to be a lot more quarterbacks drafted, or at least see Bo Nix or maybe Michael Penix in the first round.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just to add a couple more in there, when you look at the offensive line, especially these offensive tackles, that's where I get a lot of surprises because we're still early. I haven't fully scouted any of these guys, and there's a lot of ones that are very close. I mean, look at a guy like Kingsley from BYU, Jordan Morgan from Arizona. I've been hearing really great things about Patrick Paul from Houston. There's a lot up in the air, so maybe not the perfect mock. It never will be, but I still feel like we covered a lot of our bases here, and I really hope you guys enjoyed it at home.
Yeah, and we'll see you guys soon with another one.